Does your garage look like this, but you need it to look like this? I'm Home DIY Dan and I'm going to show you how. Alright, so we're going to make this form out of a 4x8 melamine sheet. I'm doing the L-shaped design, so we're going to cut the short end, the long end, and then we got to cut all the sides to hold the concrete in the form. Now those sides I went for an 1.5 inch deep countertop. I did depth of the melamine plus 1.5 inches. So then, because it's an L, I screwed a piece of plywood down to the bottom of it to secure it together. Once the plywood was secured to the melamine, I flipped it over and started screwing the sides to the base of the melamine. So this will be where your pour happens. Now melamine is a particle board coated in a plastic, which will be perfect when you're doing a concrete form because the concrete won't as easily stick to the melamine. Now once all the form sides are up, you're going to have to put a silicone bead around all the corners to prevent that concrete from leaking into the melamine, or leaking out of it. And the bigger you go with the bead of silicone, the bigger the rounded edge on the countertop is going to be. If you go real thin, you'll get a more sharp edge. So just fill in all the holes with the silicone. So then you're going to go through and you're going to level your form to make sure that that base is nice and level for when you do the pour. Now it's time for a silly string fight. Okay, so now I'm mixing up a little grout and some glitter because I want to do some fake veining throughout the concrete. We're going to do these forms and these kind of countertops on our outdoor kitchen, so I wanted to try out a couple different techniques on the workbench before I did it out back. So you're going to spray everything down with WD-40. So this is your release agent that helps ensure the concrete doesn't stick to anything within the board. Then I took the grout and I sprayed it out, or spread it out in kind of a veining marble-like form. One thing I would have done is done it a little bit thicker because the concrete does kind of absorb a lot of it, and when the concrete's poured, it moves everything that's in there. So it'll move the grout, and then I put down some fire rocks, some red ones that I bought on Amazon and some blue ones that I found at Home Depot. And when I did the pour, they all kind of moved. So one thing I would have done is sprayed them down with a low-tack adhesive to the melamine, and that would have ensured they didn't move, because I liked how they looked with the randomness of the pattern here. But when I poured the concrete, it moved them all out of the way. Now I could have done a little more watery concrete and it wouldn't have been as dense and it wouldn't have moved them as easily, but it would have taken a little longer to dry and set up, which in retrospect I was fine with because I had plenty of time. Alright, now we're getting ready to do the concrete. I did a ready set mortar mix from Home Depot. The instructions on the bag says you can do 3.5 to 4.5 quarts per bag, 55-pound bag. I did 3.75. I probably would have done 4 or 4.25 quart. Would have been a little easier to work with. And then I did the concrete color. I did 1 bottle per bag. and it did give it a nice dark finish on the concrete. But because of the mix process and the water, the color wasn't consistent all the way through. So I think in retrospect, I would have mixed all the water together, poured it in a bigger container, and mixed all the concrete at once and used set control to make sure that it didn't set up before I had a chance to pour it all out. That way I would get an even consistent color all the way through, as opposed to the 5 slightly different variations that I have. So then I got all the bags set up, put a open bag of flow control right next to them so that I was ready to go as soon as we were ready to pour. I had the water in the buckets already. I poured the flow control in first, and then my wife assisted with the mixing as I slowly poured the bag of concrete in there. That turned out to be the easiest way to do it. It worked out really well, and with the quick setup time with this mortar mix, you really need to move fast unless you're using the set control. Now the first one I mixed up, I think it had a little less water than the rest of them, so it was really thick and hard to work with. As the other ones went, they had a little bit more water. I measured wrong on that first one, I guess, so that one was harder to work with. But as I'm troweling it, my wife's mixing up the next bag so that I'm ready to pour right away. And then I set her up to mix the next one so that as I'm pouring, she's mixing. So we got all this mixed and poured in about 15 minutes, maybe a little less, which worked out perfectly. So the only thing, like I said, was the denser concrete did move a lot of the rocks around a lot more, and you could see where the edge of the pour lines were in the concrete, which looks cool, don't get me wrong, but I would have rather had it a little more random. So between the less dense concrete and using a little low tack adhesive, I think it would have turned out a lot better. So you can see there, it's kind of pushing the rocks into that circular pattern. So then once all the concrete was poured, just trowel out the base to make sure that, or the top, to make sure that it's nice and even. Doesn't have to be perfect. This is the bottom of your countertop. And when you're done, you can always go through and grind it off if there's any spots that are uneven. After that, you want to go through and pound the sides with a hammer to work out all those air bubbles, or use a palm sander or some other device. You also have to keep this wet for at least an hour while it's drying. This is the mortar mix from Ready Set at Home Depot. It cured within an hour. We went to flip it, and it was a little heavy. I had to get my neighbor's help. He didn't want to be on video, but so we flip it over, and this is the result. So there is some pitting, mostly from where the rocks and things were. Now we're going to fill that in with a bit of a slurry, and we're going to grind it all down with a diamond grinder to even it out. Here we're mixing up the slurry, which is just Portland cement and water. And then you want to get it to like a pancake batter type consistency. I also added some more glitter just to see if it turned out cool with the slurry filling in some of the holes, which I think it gave it a little bit of a different look. It's hard to tell. I don't think it really made much of a difference, but once you get that slurry all mixed up, you're going to spread it out on top of the concrete and then let it dry. You want to make sure you really press it into any of the holes, and if you have to go back and do a second coat, that's not a big deal. And then from there, you're going to grind it off with either a diamond grinder or a 50 grit pad. I did 2 passes with the diamond grinder, then 2 passes wet with the 50, 2 passes with the 100. So I did the diamond, the 50, and the 100 all wet. It kept a lot of the dust down. It did make a giant mess on the floor, so just be aware of that. I was spraying the floor down constantly, but I still had to wash the floor maybe 5 or 6 times before I got all the haze off of it from this. Once you're done with that, you switch to the 200 grit, and this is where I started going dry. It didn't create as much dust, and that was in an open garage, so it wasn't that big of a deal. And then I did 2 passes with each one of the subsequent grits going all the way up to 6,000. So 2 passes with the 200, 2 passes with the 400, 800, 1600, 3000, and 6000. I tried to go in the same pattern, left to right, working my way down, and then just working through the grits. 400, this is a 400, it's already really smooth. You could stop here if you wanted, but I wanted a really nice polished look, and I had the pad, so I may as well. I'll put a link to the description down below. After each grit, I would wipe it down just to get any of the residual dust off of it, and so I could feel how smooth it was. And then once I got to the 6,000 grit though, I did switch to a random orbital sander as opposed to the angle grinder that I'm using right here. Just gave me a little more control and didn't spin as fast. So here's the 6,000. Alright, now that we got the countertop nice and polished, time to build the base. I'm anchoring 2x4s to the studs in the wall. I set them up where with the top of the countertop it would be about even with the top of my wrist when I'm standing there. So I just measured how long each side was, which was 6x6, and then I subtracted 4 inches from each side so I could have a bit of a lip. I don't want to put a vise or any clamps along the edge. So then I secured the 2x4s with the studs, made sure they were nice and level, and I used the laser level to give me a good mark all the way around so I didn't have to keep marking everything. I knew exactly where it needed to be. So then I secured the 4x4s to the 2x4s, leaving enough room to put a 2x4 around it, and continued building the outside of the bench. Gotta make sure everything's level as you go. And then I measured to make sure that I got the correct height for the next 4x4, cut it, and then secured it to the 2x4 with 3-inch deck screws. I also inset each 4x4 1.5 inches so that the 2x4s would be perfectly flush as I did it. And I had my little assistant to mark the wood for me to make sure I was in the right spot. Secured the other 4x4 to the wall, and then built the other outside edge. Now measuring for where these inside 2x4s were going to go and how long they were was a little tricky. So what I did was I measured 4 inches on the inside of the countertop and then had it line up in the middle where right in that inside corner I was going to have the final 4x4, and then I just measured from that end to the middle and then from the middle over to that end, and I had a perfect length for my 2x4s and a perfect placement for the 4x4 right in the middle. 4x4 to the back corner to make sure that that had plenty of stability, and then cut the 2x4s for lined them up, made sure they were nice and level, them on each side, and then mounted them together in the corner and put the 4x4 in. I then used Loctite construction adhesive and put that along the top edge, just to make sure that that countertop wasn't going to go anywhere. It's 400 pounds. It's probably not going anywhere, but I didn't want to take a chance. So put that on every corner, and then shimmied it onto the top after I had put it up on some 4x4s to get it a little closer to the final height, and then just moved it into place. It's actually not too bad when you're doing it that way. It's just a matter of pushing it into place and getting it secure. And here's the final product.
The workbench is complete. Well, it turned out fantastic. I learned a bunch of things I'm gonna carry over to when I do the bar area by the pool. But for a workbench and for my first time doing this looks fantastic. And the garage looks phenomenal compared to what it looked like before. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button and share this video to anyone you think might find it helpful. I'm Home DIY Dan. Have a good one, guys.